It's Wednesday night after a long day, and the last thing you want to do is cook dinner from scratch. But you still want a satisfying, tasty meal without the guilt? Enter your freezer's sidekick, Cauliflower. From thin and crispy cauliflower crust pizzas to all-natural white meat chicken tenders and more, Cauliflower is gluten-free always, satisfies every craving, and is ready in minutes. Cauliflower is available in freezer aisles nationwide. Visit eatcauliflower.com/where-to-buy to find a store near you.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to look for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us.
Please stay tuned at the conclusion of this episode to hear about our Patreon program and our commitment to help find people who have gone missing. We'll also share with you where you can find more information and how you can join our team and help our efforts. You'll get recommendations for other podcasts we think you'll enjoy, and more.
So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Episode 4, Marie Ann Watson. Marie Ann Watson was born to parents Lucille and Leon Baxter on December 3, 1949. Unfortunately, we know next to nothing about Marie's early life, but we do know that Marie's mother was allegedly verbally abusive, and so the young woman ended up moving out and supporting herself. In 1974, she was arrested in Colorado for prostitution and drug possession. Marie's two small children, Sandy, age 3, and Jack, age 5, who were half-siblings, were placed in foster care for the duration of her incarceration, which was just 1 year. Rather than being tossed anonymously into the system, they were taken in by Dorothy and Mike Rogers of Emmett, Idaho. This arrangement was at the request of Marie, who knew that the Rogerses often took in foster children. Dorothy Rogers was a relative of Marie's. The family tree has become muddied over the years, but it is believed that Dorothy was Marie's aunt, her mother Lucille's stepsister. Marie's daughter, Sandy Taranto, who is our guest today, does not know with certainty who her own father is. The Rogerses were very active within the child foster care system in Idaho, taking in multiple kids at a time. According to Sandy, the couple even went so far as to seek out unwanted kids to add to their brood. And Dorothy and Mike were not selective. They took in kids of all types, including those with disabilities, behavioral challenges, or who were racial minorities. They called their wards their street kids, changed their given names, and adopted them into the fold. The number of foster kids in the Rogers home was as high as 7 at one time. They fostered as many as 17 in total. It was the 70s, and Child Protective Services were not at all what they are today. No one was paying much attention to what happened to these kids after they were taken in. There were rumors about what exactly went on at the Rogers house at 5611 Cascade Road, and these involved satanic rituals resulting in severe abuse. But no one really checked to see whether the rumors were true. Mike was known among his co-workers at the mill to have a violent temper, and both he and Dorothy abused and beat their foster children. Their public veneer as charitable Christians who took in needy kids prevented outsiders from questioning what was going on. Despite her personal struggles and her poor decisions in life, Marie wanted to retrieve her children from Mike and Dorothy. When she was released from prison in 1975 after serving a year, Marie went to collect Sandy and Jack from the Rogerses. But the Rogerses wanted to keep the kids, now ages 6 and 8, and started court proceedings to formalize their adoption. Back and forth court filings commenced and continued for 2 years. The court required that Marie provide a stable family environment, so she married a man named Jimmy Watson and the couple bought a house in Emmett. Marie received word that she got a job she wanted, and after all was said and done, Marie was slated to be awarded custody of her kids. The sheriff was charged with delivering the official court order announcing the ruling. But then, before he could do so, on November 22, 1977, Marie vanished. On that day, Marie and Dorothy had traveled together to a town in Oregon in order to pick up records from a psychiatrist who had determined that Sandy had been sexually abused. The two women met at a cafe in town and drove together in a vehicle owned by Ramon, one of the Rogers' older foster children. On the drive home, they skidded into a snowbank, Dorothy told police later. When they came to a stop, according to Dorothy, a dark-colored, run-down black car pulled up in front of them. Marie ran up to the car, jumped in, and was driven away. This was the last Dorothy or anyone saw of Marie. Dorothy's story is suspect, of course. Marie's ID, uncashed paycheck, car keys, and wallet were left in her vehicle, which was parked at the cafe where she had met up with Dorothy. Her husband found the car there the next day. The likelihood that Marie knew another driver on the road and ran off with him without any of her things is very small. And Marie's disappearance was very convenient for the Rogerses, who wanted to keep her kids. Unfortunately, Sandy, who was 6 years old at the time, knows what happened to her mother. She has clear memories of her mother being disposed of by Mike and Dorothy. She saw them carrying Marie, who was wearing a teal-colored shirt, into the Rogers' house, where she was placed in a fetal position inside a false cabinet in a storage room where Mike usually hid his guns. Then, horrifyingly, Sandy spied on Mike, Dorothy, the foster son named Ramon, who was 17, and two others. She heard an electric saw and caught glimpses of what they were doing. She believes they cut up Marie's body and disposed of the parts. Sandy feels that the police only looked into her mother's case very perfunctorily. The cops did not like Mike Rogers and generally stayed away from him, as he often threatened to shoot them if they came around. Further, they clearly believed that Marie, an ex-drug addict and sex worker, had just skipped town, as they stated that she was known to disappear for months at a time. The police also turned a blind eye to the abuse occurring in the Rogers household. About a year after Marie vanished, Sandy and Jack were finally taken away from the Rogerses. This was after one of the older foster daughters escaped and informed the sheriff's department of the sexual abuse going on in the Rogers household. After several weeks on the run, Mike and Dorothy were apprehended in Arkansas. Mike was sentenced to 5 years in prison for child molestation. The stories of abuse began to emerge. Sandy's brother had been brutally beaten by Mike and had escaped and alerted the sheriff's department, which immediately returned him to the Rogers' care. The wounds on Kevin, another foster child, are documented in photos. After Mike Rogers' arrest, Lucille and Leon Baxter, Marie's parents, sued for custody of their grandchildren Sandy and Jack. They won, and Sandy was raised by them. In 1996, nearly 20 years after Marie vanished, the inquiry into her disappearance was reopened. This was because one of the Rogers' other adopted sons, Ramon, who had formerly been known as Raymond, was arrested in San Diego, California, and found to be a serial killer. He had killed and dismembered at least 3 persons, 2 of his girlfriends and a former roommate. In the course of this investigation, police contacted Sandy, who told them the story of her mother and her memories of Marie being cut up by Ramon and her foster parents. And Sandy's story about abuse, violence, and rape was backed up by several of the other foster children, who had not seen each other in years, yet still told consistent stories. Another of the foster children, called Kevin, but whose real name was John Jones, told investigators he saw Marie tied up in the Rogers home. These stories led to the investigation into Marie's disappearance being reopened in Emmett, Idaho. Sandy told investigators that Marie had been wearing a teal shirt, jeans, and a fur-lined jacket when she disappeared. Investigators noted that at the time Marie was last seen with Dorothy Rogers, the Rogerses had been building a new cement foundation under the mobile home that still sat there and was now owned by Ramon Rogers. Thanks to the work of Gem County Detective Tom Nesbitt, who interviewed the former Rogers foster children and gathered their statements that Dorothy had been killed at the Rogers home, investigators finally got a search warrant to remove the mobile home sitting on that foundation and search underneath the concrete. After jacking up the house, the FBI assisted with a high-tech X-ray system to penetrate the concrete and also looked at a pig pen and a fruit cellar on the property. And part of a shin bone with saw marks wrapped in a brown-stained teal shirt was eventually dug up. Testing on the bone and t-shirt were inconclusive, so no charges were filed. Now that authorities knew he was a serial killer, Ramon was considered a suspect in the disappearance of Marie Ann Watson. It was not clear whether Marie had been killed by Mike or Dorothy or their budding serial killer son. In 2016, police in Emmett, Idaho reopened the Marie Ann Watson case once again, concluding that she was murdered in Ada County. According to Sandy, prosecutors in Ada County are willing to proceed with charges against the Rogerses, but the Gem County authorities have not cooperated in handing over the investigative records. And the Gem County Sheriff's Department has refused to release the bones and teal t-shirt for further testing. Ramon Rogers remains on death row, now converted to a life sentence in California. Marie Ann Watson was 28 years old when she vanished. She was white, 5'7", about 110 pounds, with brown hair and blue eyes. If you have any information about Marie Ann Watson's disappearance, please call the Gem County Sheriff's Office at 208-365-3521. Mike Morford sat down to talk with Marie Ann Watson's daughter, Sandy Toronto, for missing persons. That conversation is coming up after this word from our sponsors.
It's Wednesday night after a long day, and the last thing you want to do is cook dinner from scratch. But you still want a satisfying, tasty meal without the guilt? Enter your freezer's sidekick, Cauliflower. From thin and crispy cauliflower crust pizzas to all-natural white meat chicken tenders and crowd-pleasing snacks, Cauliflower satisfies every craving. Cauliflower's products are your favorite comfort foods, but made better for you and gluten-free always. The best part? You don't have to sacrifice taste or time, so you can honor your cravings without compromising. Craving pizza? You can enjoy Cauliflower's delicious margarita pizza for only 370 calories for half the pizza. Looking for easy snacks that kids and adults alike will love? Cauliflower's baked, never-fried pizza snacks are nostalgia reimagined and ready in 5 minutes. Cauliflower's products are available in freezer aisles nationwide. Visit eatcauliflower.com/where-to-buy to find a store near you.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
Please consider supporting our sponsors the way that our sponsors support this podcast. It's with our sponsor support that we can continue to bring you new episodes of Missing Persons.
Hi, Sandy, and thanks for coming on Missing Persons to discuss your mom's case.
Hi, Mike. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. I was doing some reading before we got together here on the phone, and this is a really tricky case with a lot of backstory. And one thing I wanted to see if we could do is try and start at the beginning and just maybe give us an understanding of what was going on in your life and your mom's life in 1977 when she vanished. You were how old at the time?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll step back even a little further than that, because I think helping people understand that it started a little before that, before she disappeared. She went to prison. She was a prostitute and a drug addict, and she went to jail for a year. And that was when she lost custody of myself and my half-brother. And that's how we ended up with Dorothy and Mike Rogers. They came forward and said, we're foster parents, we love children, et cetera, et cetera. And immediately at that, most people think, well, the woman was a prostitute and a drug addict. Those people, they kind of know what they're getting into. And that tends to end things for most people. But unfortunately, once you start listening to it and looking at the overview of it, it becomes extremely complicated very quickly. And she was in jail for prostitution possession. She got out a year later. I was 3 when she went to jail. So a year later, when I was 4, she had gotten her life together, and she started going to college. She went to court to try to get custody of us back because it was intended to be a temporary foster situation from the beginning. Mike and Dorothy said, no, we want to adopt them. We love them. We're not going to give them up. At that point, my mother was sober. She was going to college. She got married at the insistence of the court. She bought a house at the insistence of the court. Now, during that time frame, I'm still with the Rogers foster family. When I was 6, which is 1977, I was 6 years old, the court had granted my mother custody of us. 2 days before she disappeared, November 20, 1977, the court delivered paperwork to the sheriff's department and asked them to deliver it on the 24th. On the 22nd, my mother disappeared. So 2 days before was their last day to give this warrant to the Rogers house, my mother disappeared. And therefore the warrant was not served because my mother was dead or missing, according to them.
Was this warrant to give custody back to your mom? Is that what the warrant had to do with?
Correct, yes. The warrant said that the court had decided in her favor and we were to be remanded to her custody permanently henceforth. So as I said, 2 days before that was the last day the sheriff's department was allowed to deliver it, she disappeared. The sheriff's department at that point in time did an investigation. Their investigation consisted of going to Dorothy Rogers and saying, "You were the last person to see her alive. What happened?" And Dorothy gave them a story about, we went to Oregon. This all happened in Idaho. We went to Oregon to pick up papers from a psychiatrist who had checked with, I don't know what word you could use, but diagnosed that I had been sexually abused. So they went to get that paperwork to present to the court. And on the way back from that, they went off the road into a snowbank and got stuck, at which point a black car drove up. My mother jumped out of the car, ran over to talk to the person in the black car. The pair of them jumped in the black car together and took off. And that was the last she saw of her. And she probably took off because you know how those people are. And that was the investigation. That was a half page of paper that was in the file up until 1996.
Wow. So that this unbelievable coincidence of somebody just coming out of nowhere that your mom decides to run off with, that's the story that Dorothy gave to the authorities.
Correct. And she said they had taken one of the foster son's cars to and from. And that was why my mother's car was found at a local diner where she worked with her keys, her wallet, all of her identification, and an uncashed paycheck in it. So apparently she just took off without her paycheck, without her keys. This person that she took off with didn't take her to go get her car or her keys or her paycheck. They just vanished into thin air. However, it gets more interesting than that. In the most recent investigation, come to find out there was no snow that day. There had been no snow recent to that day in the area specified where they went off, or actually in the whole local area. And it was actually warm enough that day and the day prior that any snow would have melted off. So the snow that they slid in and ended up in a snowbank didn't even exist.
And the story already sounds kind of shady, but then they go back and verify there was no snow there to begin with. So it's got all kinds of holes in it.
Correct.
To backtrack for 1 second, and I didn't want to go too far without asking you this. When the Rogers came forward to say they would adopt you and your brother, did they Did you know them? Did your family know them, or did they just come out of the blue?
Oh, gracious. That's an interesting question. So the story goes that Dorothy is at least my mother's aunt. Although, given the time frame, it was not done to have children, quote unquote, out of wedlock. So there are a lot of stories in the family that Dorothy is actually my mother's sister, that she was left behind by my grandmother, who is her actual mother. So instead of being my mother's aunt, she may be my mother's first sister, older sister. I don't know the truth of that.
Yeah, I think that's something that we see a lot of in some of the old, when that kind of stuff, having children out of wedlock, or whether the result of an affair or anything like that. It seems like back in that time frame, they didn't really like to acknowledge that stuff, so they would make up these stories, and that sounds like that's a possibility with them, is what you're saying.
Yes, and in a way, it does directly relate, because a lot of the stories that I heard was that Dorothy hated my mother with a passion because my mother got to grow up in relative comfort versus Dorothy, who grew up in abject squalor. That may have been why, in particularly, she targeted me and my brother. And it may also have factored into the catastrophic levels of abuse that I experienced while with them.
Well, and if you don't mind, if you're willing to talk about that, what did you experience? What do you remember experiencing when you lived with them?
Well, during that time frame, it's important to understand that I actually have a speech impediment. Fortunately, I overcame it when I was 8 years old, but it was very visible before, or you would hear it very well before that. And so they thought that, in the vernacular of the time, that I was a retard. Because of that, and because of their assumption that I was essentially the same intelligence level as a dog or a cat, that was how they treated me. I was forced to eat dog food on the floor because I wasn't a person. I was just a retard. That was Dorothy's way of coping with the fact that I was not in any way in love with her. I did not like her. I did not want her. I wanted my mommy. And I believe that's a big part of what continued to be a problem between us. In addition to the fact that Mike was sexually abusing me. And every time that Mike sexually abused me, Dorothy would punish me for, quote unquote, seducing her husband. And the actions that she would do to punish me for that were extreme. I don't hide it because I believe that only protects them, not me. Incredibly painful. It was also immensely humiliating, which is what she wanted. And during these times, since they were on the surface, to what everybody else thought they were fundamentalist Baptists, well, that was one of her chosen ways to laugh at me. She would make me pray to Jesus, and then she would tell me that Jesus is never going to save you because you're not a person. This kind of thing was constant. It was just a way of life. And I was not the only one who was being abused there. My brother was also terribly abused. Kathleen and Kevin were another brother and sister that they had as foster children, and they were also severely abused. There were a couple of children who were her favorites. Michelle, who was adopted at birth, and she's the only one that was ever legally adopted. Nobody else, to any paperwork existing, any knowledge from any records. Michelle was the only one ever truly adopted. I believe she was a favorite because Dorothy never had any competition for her affection. Michelle was never crying for her mommy because Dorothy was her mommy as far as she had known for her entire life. The other one is Raymond. I knew him as Raymond, but his name now, I don't know if he legally changed it or changed it back, but his name is Ramon Rogers. He's a serial killer, and he was 17 at the time of my mother's disappearance.
So let me just pause here for a second. So you're living in clearly what is abusive and beyond that, maybe torturous conditions. Were there any other people around, any other kind of adult supervision to check on you? Or was your mom able to hear about any of this stuff when she got herself together and was ready to take you back? Was she aware of any of this stuff?
Yes, actually, she was aware of it. And if you go in and you read some of the transcripts of the newspaper clippings, I think they call it DHHS at the time, which is basically Children's Welfare Service, the Department of Health and Human Services, I believe they called it then. They were aware as well, and they, to my knowledge, I never remember a visit from anybody. I don't know what they ever did with it, but in another one, the sheriff admitted, there's all kinds of crazy accusations flying around. And so there were a lot of people who knew about it. And there were other people who were told about it and went to the sheriff's department and were told, mind your own business. In fact, to that point, in that area, that's pretty much who you have to go to, is the sheriff's department. There's nobody else. So you go to the sheriff, and then they're supposed to take it to the next step. Unfortunately, the sheriff's department, when my brother escaped and made it to the sheriff's department, to them, and he was beaten and bruised and bleeding, they took him back. They shoved him in the car, and they drove him back and dumped him back with Mike and Dorothy, beaten from head to toe and bleeding.
That's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So when he gets placed back there, obviously your mom gets out. She's cleaned herself up. She wants to start a new life. She wants to get you kids back and give you a good home again. And she disappears with a crazy story that just doesn't make sense. Did the police believe her crazy story at all about what had happened? How closely did they look into that at the time?
As I said, there was one page. That was it. They were not interested. They did not care. No further investigation.
Do you think that's because they were lazy, or maybe they knew them and just thought there's no way they would be involved and just let it go under the rug?
You know, it's really hard for me to say, because there have been so many times that the sheriff's department there has obfuscated or actively blocked this investigation, that it is hard for me to give a reasonable explanation for their behavior. Taking that one snapshot of that one moment. Okay, so in their mind, she was just a prostitute and a drug addict. And how do we know she's cleaned up and been sober? Whatever. It's just, and these are good, upstanding people. And, they might be kind of scary, but they're Christians and they're good people and we know them. And she hangs out with that crowd over there. And back then, possibly slightly more than now, but it's still a very prevalent and present and terrible attitude, is those people get up to things. And it's probably just the garbage taking out the garbage. Because here you have people living in squalor, fighting over custody with another person living in squalor. And from the way that they look at it, who cares? Who cares what those people do? Most of the foster children there were like me, special needs, or they were like Raymond, who is Latino, or like Michelle, who is Black, like Rocky, who is an American Indian. And so you've got all of these minorities that are hard to place, and nobody wants to deal with it. Nobody wanted to deal with us. What were they going to do? Take us out of foster care and put us in foster care? Nobody saw us as people. I honestly feel that was the main problem at that time frame. Gay people were not people. Oh, who knows what those gay people get up to? And that's not the word they would have used. They wouldn't have called them gay people.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for, who cares what those black people, and they wouldn't have used that word either, get up to. And those poor people and those prostitutes.
Yeah, and your mom with a history of drugs or prostitution, they would have just said, whatever, she's must be up to no good, and whatever happened or has something to do with that.
Exactly. And that was exactly what happened to my mother. And that was exactly why they left us there. Additionally, they were afraid of Mike. It is well known that Mike is a terrifying individual. He talked about killing people. And he would talk about killing people and say, and if you piss me off, I'll do the same to you. He bragged about it. He made no bones about it. So he was a very frightening person. In fact, during the 1996 investigation, they said they were so afraid of him that the sheriff's department was so afraid of Mike, the foster father, that he would call in and say, you better get your deputy off my road or I'll shoot him. And they would radio out and say, you better get out of there before Rogers shoots you.
And how long did you have to live at that house in those conditions? How long were you there altogether before you were able to get out of there?
So the house there in Idaho, I was there from age 3 until age 6. Shortly after my mother disappeared, a warrant was issued on Mike because Kathleen, if you remember, she's one of the other foster girls. She was 14. She escaped because he raped her again, and this time he did it in front of everybody. He tied her to a bed and raped her in front of all the foster boys and all of us kids. She escaped. She went to the sheriff's department, and she actually got to go to a judge, and a judge issued a warrant. The judge sent the warrant to the sheriff's department to be served on Mike. 2 days before the date that it was to be served to Mike, Mike took us all, and he went on the run with us across country. He went from Idaho up into Oregon and then all the way across the states to Arkansas. And yes, if you notice, that 2 days comes up again with a warrant. And it is another point at which I find it hard to give a rational explanation for. It's very convenient that my mother disappeared 2 days before they were about to lose us, and we went on the run 2 days before a warrant had to be served on him for raping Kathleen.
One could almost say that he had some kind of warning that something was coming and he took action before that could happen.
It certainly looks suspicious, in my opinion, especially given further things that happened because bones were found in 1996 that the sheriff's department is now refusing to release. A lot of things don't stack up with that sheriff's department.
So they may be hiding something or something may be shady, possibly. And were you hoping that those bones might be checked against your mom's, that they could be her remains?
Yes. In fact, is it okay if we skip around here in things a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so to go to the 1996 investigation, I was living in Florida at the time, and I got a knock on my door. And I opened the door, and it was the police, the Florida police. And they said, we just want to check and make sure that you're really you. And we have some questions to ask you. And so they asked me all their questions to figure out that it really was me and it wasn't somebody living under my identity. And then I said, this is very curious. Why are you guys doing this? And they said, well, do you know Ramon Rogers? And I said, oh, never heard of him. Well, how about Raymond Rogers? I said, oh, well, yes, I have heard of him. So they explained that he had been arrested with dismembered bodies in his storage area. They said, we just needed to be absolutely sure that one of those bodies was not you. So I said, well, before you go, would you like to know where he learned to dismember human bodies? And they kind of looked at each other like, do we? So they sat down and I explained to them that I remember watching as Mike and Dorothy, Raymond, Ramon, and 2 other people dismembered my mother. They were...
I was going to say that must have been shocking for them to hear you say that.
Well, they definitely sat down to listen at that point. And I explained to them what happened, and they said, well, we'll get back to you. And shortly after that, again, this is 1996, so shortly after that, a deputy from the sheriff's department, Tom Nesbitt, at the time he was a deputy in Jim County where it happened, called me and said, so the police told me what you said. Would you be willing to come out here and give us a deposition and tell us everything that you know and what you saw? And I said yes, and I flew out, and I explained to him that I had seen her multiple times. I believe it was all that night. I can't be 100% sure because I was a child, and your memories just don't work that way. But I explained that I had seen her several times and said, this is, what was she wearing? I said she was wearing a teal shirt, and she had a jacket on with like a, kind of a fur lining and jeans. And I said that I saw him carrying her up the stairs, and, I went through the entire thing of each time that I saw her. So they decided that on my suggestion, because I said, as I remember it, they were digging in under the house to put in a new charnel pit. It was covered in right after I saw that happen. So they said, well, then we'll go ahead and dig out under the house. So they removed the trailer that was sitting there at that time, and they started excavating under. They broke down the concrete foundation. They started excavating under it, and they found bones. And one in particular, they found a sawed-off bone wrapped in a teal T-shirt with dark brown stains on the teal T-shirt.
To backtrack, and one thing I just wanted to check on, the memories of what you have of this dismembering, was that something you always remembered clearly? Did that come back to you as you grew older? Can you tell us just a little bit more about your memory of that in particular?
I always remembered that. In fact, I had nightmares my entire life about that. I wet the bed until I was 13 years old because I was afraid to get up at night to go to the bathroom. I was afraid of what I would see if I was out of bed at night again, ever. And I mean, it's a little humiliating to admit that, but I wet the bed till I was 13 because of what I saw. And I did try to tell my grandmother at that time what I saw. And she became irate and told me, you just saw a movie or something and you decided it was all about you. You're a narcissist. You took that, And ironically, I was never allowed to watch TV. I didn't see, I saw TV for the first time when I was in foster care after being removed from the Rogerses. And the only thing I saw was the Star Wars movie. And I saw a movie called Gus. Those are my entire, up until the time when I was talking to my grandmother about this, that was my entire movie TV experience. Star Wars and Gus. So I certainly hadn't seen a movie and made it up from a movie. I saw a few shows for a few minutes on the tiny little black and white TV at Mike and Dorothy's house until I got caught looking at it and got beaten for it. I remembered it my entire life, and it has always been the same memory. It hasn't changed. It hasn't grown. It hasn't morphed. People always tell me, oh, well, memories change as you get older. But I'm autistic, and so for me, everything is very literal, and it has taken me many years, decades, if I'm honest, to stop feeling like everything has to be literal. So as a child, nobody could have told me a story and had me believe it was true. As far as I would have remembered, somebody told me. I wouldn't remember it as this happened. So I remember it as this happened, not I saw this on TV. I don't remember it that way. I don't remember it as somebody told me. I remember it as this is what happened. And I have spoken to other child memory analysts, and they have stated plainly, I don't hear any deception in what you're telling me. Like, there are no markers for deception in this explanation. Obviously, people have to make their own determination about it, but I know I've remembered it my whole life.
Yeah, and that memory, obviously, if it's one that you witnessed, it's horrible. But at the very least, we know that no matter what, you were living in a horrible environment, because you've got these abusive foster parents, and then you have a foster brother who grows up to be a serial killer. Any one of them could have been involved in your mom's disappearance. And so, looking back now, years later, I know that early on the police certainly didn't look at these people closely, but looking back now, all these years later, how closely have they investigated and looked at that family?
Oh, unfortunately for Tom, who is the same investigator who investigated in 1996. He started investigating, I believe it was 2016 when he started investigating again currently. He ripped that entire, basically, locale apart. Everybody involved as much as he could, and basically, this is the darkest, most horrible thing I've ever investigated or even heard of. He was just appalled and basically devastated by what he found out. He also started investigating, like, his investigation took him all across the country. He looked into my grandparents, my mother's parents. He looked into my mother's ex-husband, my brother's father. And there's torture all over the place. Like, my mother, I have a feeling that I know why she became a prostitute. She actually wrote a letter of why she became a prostitute, but even more so, having grown up with my grandmother as long as I did, my grandmother also constantly accused my mother of seducing her husband. You're a whore. Why are you dressed like that? She would do crazy things like hide her shoes. Like, you left your shoes out in the middle of the floor, so now you don't have any shoes. And so she was not a great person either, as far as she had been raised in the same terrifying cultish environment as Dorothy. So there are tremendous similarities between the two of them. And the more that Tom looked into Mike and looked into Dorothy, the scarier and more dark and just bizarre things became. Now, I do have my opinion of my mother, because I don't have memories of my mother ever sexually abusing me. But according to those people related to Mike and Dorothy, they claim that it was actually my mother doing those things, and that poor Dorothy was just doing the best she could to protect us and help us. And, all of this is just according to her religion. Her religion believes that you can beat the evil out of a child. And since I was retarded, she was just trying to beat the evil out of me. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect me. She changed my name from Sandy to Joanne to protect me, so nobody would know that I was Marie's children who had been through, so much. And they started claiming that there was satanic ritual abuse. So they admit that it happened, but they say that it was my mother doing it. Although, to my memories, it was Mike. Getting into all of this stuff is really, really hard, because as soon as people hear that satanic ritual abuse word, they're like, oh, no, it didn't happen. None of it happened. But the thing is, I don't know that it was intended to be satanic ritual abuse as much as it was just sadism dressed up as something else. Talking to the police officer and listening to what he learned has been incredibly difficult as well, because I know my family, all of that family, and they are my family, whether I like it or not. A lot of them are screwed up, to say the least. And I've only talked to a couple of female cousins, but they have all said all of us were sexually abused. All of us were sexually assaulted. They would say, I was sexually assaulted numerous times by multiple male relatives. It's like a way of life. And Tom had to go into that and research all that. And, you have to pick out, I can't imagine how he picked out the truth of, this person says that and that person says this. And I can't imagine, I wouldn't be a police officer. I wouldn't be able to handle it. Knowing what I know in my own memory, and then he has to go back 40 years later. It must be incredibly difficult.
It's Wednesday night after a long day, and the last thing you want to do is cook dinner from scratch. But you still want a satisfying, tasty meal without the guilt? Enter your freezer's sidekick, Cauliflower. From thin and crispy cauliflower crust pizzas to all-natural white meat chicken tenders and crowd-pleasing snacks, Cauliflower satisfies every craving. Cauliflower's products are your favorite comfort foods, but made better for you and gluten-free always. The best part? You don't have to sacrifice taste or time, so you can honor your cravings without compromising. Craving pizza? You can enjoy Cauliflower's delicious margarita pizza for only 370 calories for half the pizza. Looking for easy snacks that kids and adults alike will love? Cauliflower's baked, never fried pizza snacks are nostalgia reimagined and ready in 5 minutes. Cauliflower's products are available in freezer aisles nationwide. Visit eatcauliflower.com/where-to-buy to find a store near you.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
And based on his investigation, his findings, did he come to any conclusions about what the most likely outcome of what happened to your mom was? Does he have any ideas or theories about where she is or where she went?
Yes, he is absolutely certain that Mike and Dorothy killed her. But the problem is, can you build the case? And then an even greater problem is, even if you can build the case, on a 40-year-old case, will the prosecuting attorney actually go forward with what they have? And right now, that's looking like the hang-up. The prosecuting attorney is like, well, this is all great, but it's a 40-year-old case. Who gives a rip? And a lot of Tom's investigation was actually on his own time. His bosses were kind enough to say, we'll let you investigate, but understand you need to, we're not investigating, you're investigating. And so it was, now we're sitting there with the prosecuting attorney basically saying, whatever, I don't care. And in fact, currently, Tom has not entirely retired, but he's retired from the force, and he's now in a completely different division where he's not able to do any investigation or have anything to do with the case anymore. And the case right now, Ada County in Idaho, wants to take the case because they believe they have evidence that the actual murder happened in their county, which would make it technically their case. But the prosecuting attorney from Jim County will not release the case to him. So once again, it comes back to Jim County getting in the way of prosecution instead of supporting it. In 1996, the investigation just petered out and never went anywhere. And then now the investigation once more, even though Ada County is ready to prosecute, everything is just going to go away because the only person who has been pushing for this was Tom Nesbitt. And now he's gone.
And it's 4 decades later, the mystery is still there about what happened to your mom. How have you gone about trying to keep the case out there and for people to know that your mom's case is unsolved? I know there's some really lengthy Reddit threads that you started. What kinds of things are you doing to get that case out there so that people know about it?
Well, previously I had just kept, every few years I would call and bother them, and that made them very angry with me, by the way. However, I didn't have a lot of proof, and especially before the advent of the internet, and even really since the advent of the internet, there's not much there for me to go to and say, hey, look, this is my mother, she disappeared, I know what happened, nobody's listening to me. People tell me that didn't happen. That's not real, that doesn't happen. So that's what I've been facing pretty much my entire life, is that doesn't happen. That's not real. So it's a struggle, it really is. And recently, I've gotten to the point now where my next intention is to, basically, I want to create a campaign that says, Emmett, which is the town where it happened, Emmett has questions. And then the other part of that will be Ada County Cares. I want people to start thinking about and talking about my mother, and maybe putting some political pressure on the prosecuting attorney in Jim County to turn the case over. Because once the case is turned over, it will go forward. That's where it's at right now. Why will he not do it? I want people to be aware, and I want people to start asking. I'm going to write the governor of Idaho a letter and ask him to get involved. And I'm actually going to ask him if he will start an investigation into why Jim County, PA won't turn the case over so that it can be prosecuted. But he also won't prosecute it despite copious amounts of evidence. There is no reason this case should still be sitting here the way it is, except negligence. That is the best case scenario, in my opinion. Negligence. Otherwise, something sinister. So that's my personal view of it, that something is not right here, and I've passed the point. I have been asked to wait, Sandy, wait. We're investigating it. We're going to have answers for you. Just wait. And I waited, and I'm done waiting now. I'm ready to start pushing the issue, whether I have to go through the governor, which is very, very difficult because I don't live in Idaho. I'm writing to the governor of Idaho as basically an outsider. But in my opinion, I am a child of Idaho. I was a state ward of the state of Idaho, and they failed me, and they failed my mother, and they failed every foster child who went through that foster home. Emmett County, the people of Emmett in Jim County, have constantly talked about this. It's that case that is whispered about in dark corners, and everybody knows about it. Everybody knows who did it. Everybody knows what happened, but we don't talk about it in polite society. And yet it's sitting there unresolved. And it shouldn't be. There's no reason for it to be sitting there unresolved. There is no reason that the people who lived there during that time and the people since have to spend the rest of their life asking the question, what happened and why does nobody care? And if I get murdered, are they not going to care? And people tell me, you need to get over this. You need to move on. It's been 42 years. Get over it. But how long is it okay to love your mother? Whether she's good, bad, or indifferent, I loved her. How soon do I have to give up my love for my mother? What is the expiration date on that? For me, there isn't one. I have nobody except now I have my daughter, but for most of my life, I had nobody from age 14, and I loved my mother, and I would have loved to have my mother at my wedding. Or you know what? At least know that she's in prison or she's dead or that somebody cared about what happened to her. And I don't have that still to this day. And I may never have that. And it's not right. You know, justice for my mother is justice for me too. And it's justice for all of those children that went through that foster home and suffered horrifically. And I don't think there's a time stamp on that.
I think it's although people may be uncomfortable talking about it or addressing the situation, it seems like you're definitely willing to. I know you mentioned to me that you're writing a book about this entire 40 plus year ordeal. Can you tell me a little bit about that project?
Actually, the book is only about my childhood experience in that home. It covers the abuse that I experienced and seeing what happened to my mother. I actually lay out exactly what I saw and how I felt. And then the run across country, and the book goes back and forth between my perspective and the abuse that I was going through. And then the detective who basically followed us and in the end managed to get us away from them and all of the things that he went through. And although I'm putting it out as based on a true story, the concepts in it are accurate. For example, the disinterest, they're already with foster parents, they're fine. How we could go from school to school with no papers, no way of proving that we were their kids, and they would just put us in school and nobody asked questions. And all of these things are concepts that go into the detective's portion of the story. So I had to, condense it way down. He went through a lot more than I go into. And there were actually multiple people investigating throughout the country, you know. So he didn't work by himself in that agency, and it wasn't all him, but he's a conglomerate character of Tom Nesbitt and him and other people who basically broke their backs over a case that has stifled, been nowhere, gone nowhere. That book, I really want people to experience what I went through and understand it and realize that when we turn our backs and we mind our own business, sometimes that's the wrong thing to do. And us poor people living in squalor, we're people too.
And when will that book, do you know when that book will be out? Do you have plans on releasing it or publishing it?
I do not. Right now, unfortunately, I'm editing it by myself. A lot of editors have just not been able to handle it. I've gone through 3 now who have not been able to cope with what I went through. So I'm editing it by myself. I'm hoping that I will be done with the editing by the end of the year and will be able to submit the book to a publisher who has asked to see it again after it was finished editing.
Hopefully you're able to get that story out there. It's just a tragic case and a tragic story all around, and at the heart of it is a missing mother who is trying to rebuild her life and get her kids back and start over, and 4 decades later she's still missing. If anyone out there has information about the case, who should they contact?
I have a website, although there's also that Reddit forum, the Reddit for my mother. If they could go there and say they have information or contact me on Reddit, I still have a way to contact Tom, and he may be able to forward it to somebody in the cold case department in Idaho. But there is not now a person on the case.
And we hear about these older cases where they're just not being worked. There's nobody to handle them on a day-to-day basis, which is really sad, because that gives the impression that someone's loved ones, their case is just sitting there collecting dust, and it's very tragic.
Yes, and officially on all of the official missing posters, etc., they say to call the Jim County Sheriff's Department. But as I think you can see, that doesn't do anything for anybody.
Yeah,
It makes them angry, and they've hung up on people, and they've called people names, and so I wouldn't call them.
Well, hopefully people can maybe find you on the Reddit. It's just search for Marie Ann Watson on Reddit, and then find you and maybe message you, and you can get that to him, and he can maybe follow up on some leads for you if there's anything. Hopefully after all these years, somebody out there has information that can help.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, I appreciate you coming on and opening up. And I know it's what you talked about. It's very dark and very difficult. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us and trying to give us an understanding of what was going on in all of your lives when your mom disappeared, and where that road has led since then. So thanks for coming on and sharing that with us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate what you do. You're keeping cases in memory in your own way, keeping those people alive in hearts and thoughts of other people, and I really appreciate that. It means very much to me. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, we hope that you'll contact the appropriate authorities.
We hope that you'll tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will really help us grow. And if you'd like to help us reach new listeners, please be sure to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on.
We'd like to tell you a little bit about our Patreon program. If you visit patreon.com/missingpodcast, you can sign up to help this podcast through ongoing monthly support. As a thank you, we'll give you an on-air shout-out, a thank you card and sticker, plus you'll get ad-free early access to every new episode of Missing Persons, as well as any bonus content.
Your Patreon support also goes directly towards helping the missing, because every dollar that we earn through Patreon will be split with two worthwhile causes that benefit the efforts to bring missing people home: CharlieProject.org and Private Investigations for the Missing. Your Patreon support will really go a long way towards helping. We hope you'll consider supporting the show. Just a reminder, new episodes of Missing Persons drop every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, you can search Facebook for Missing Persons Podcast. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can always find us on our website, missingpersonspodcast.net. As we wrap up, be sure to give a listen to this preview of a podcast I think you'll really enjoy. It's called Mind Over Murder, and it's hosted by our friends Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley. So be sure to give it a listen. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.
Announcing Mind Over Murder, a new true crime podcast coming this January, hosted by Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a victim's advocate and sadly the brother of a murder victim. 33 years ago in 1986, my younger sister Kathy Thomas, along with her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski, were the first two victims in the Colonial Parkway murders in Virginia, still unsolved more than 30 years later. 10 years ago, after the FBI lost control of 78 highly graphic crime scene photos, I became much more involved in the case. I've become the de facto leader of the 8 families who lost loved ones in the Colonial Parkway murders. I'm working on a book on the case, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristen Dilley.
My name is Kristen Dilley. I'm a writer, researcher, teacher, and victims advocate with a lifelong interest in true crime. I grew up listening to stories about the Colonial Parkway murders. So in 2015, I decided to write a book about how families cope with the aftermath of violent crime. I cold called my co-host Bill Thomas, and we developed a friendship and a professional partnership that led us to build the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page, and now this podcast.
We'll be discussing solved and unsolved cases from across the country, including the Colonial Parkway murders. We'll also be bringing in top true crime experts, investigators, forensic scientists, journalists, writers, other podcasters, and family members of victims to offer insight into these cases.
Tune in to Mind Over Murder this January, wherever you get your podcasts.